Hey, real quick, before we get into that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. That way you don't miss out on any marketing nuggets. Enjoy the show.
I want to make sure that story you're telling, the guy down the street's not saying the same one.
Yes.
And I think that's where spending the money is like, you need to differentiate yourself. And you kind of can't get that when you're using templates. Everybody else has access to them.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Josh Owen. As the owner of a video marketing company in New Orleans, I've been on the quest to learn everything I can about marketing. Everyone has a different style, different strategy, and a different experience. Is there a wrong way to do it? A right way to do it? Let's find out together as we make marketing make sense. Welcome everybody to another fantastic episode of Make Marketing Make Sense. Today I'm joined by Mary Louise, the founder of Quirkus. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, today we're going to talk, you're all about design. You've been in that world for a long time. We're going to talk about great design and how to get it. And I think you know a thing or two about that.
I do. It's a passion. I think I'll be doing design till the day I die.
Wow. Like up until your deathbed?
I've been in love with it.
Wow.
And I think it loves me too. So
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, in particular, you were talking to me about there being some, there's kind of an understanding that needs to be had about design, you know, executing it versus thinking on it. Like, what is this design execution versus design thinking that you were talking to me about?
Yeah. And in the creative field, right, so many things are subjective. So many methodologies are different.
Yeah.
But I've always tried to empower clients to think about kind of building the foundations of their brand and always bringing a creative problem solver. And that's kind of the initial design thinking, right? Before I produce anything, before I wallpaper a store, right? We're thinking about your brand from a messaging standpoint and visualizing it, right? And it's kind of to get everybody on the same page in that way. A lot of times I think design is the process of executing it, right? I'm going to create a tool. I'm going to apply design, thinking and execution and implementation, right? So there's kind of, to me, that difference is sort of a pre and post, I guess, a little bit.
And so what part of it do you feel like people don't understand the most? Like what part of it, because obviously you've made this distinction for a reason. And so what part do people kind of tend to go, oh, I didn't even know that was a part of it. Especially when you're working with clients and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's a learning curve. I think a lot of brands, come in with now we're ready, let's execute design. We've registered it, we've pulled the domain, everything. And then, a lot of times it's like, okay, you want to do a business card? Your name is 4 words. It's going to be hard for me to fit that, or nobody's going to remember it. Or how are we going to sort of put that in an office space, right? So I think thinking ahead, about positioning, right? About your competitors, about how your target audience wants to engage with you. So it's always one step, presently where you are and one for the future. And I really strive to have designers part of that conversation early on. There will always be teams of strategists and PR, but designers will come in with that creative mindset that I think sometimes falls towards the end of oh, now we're ready to make pretty things.
Yeah.
No, actually, we want to be in the boardroom earlier on talking about ways that we could forecast the brand in different spaces and venues with a differentiator that nobody else looks like you, nobody else sounds like you. So I think if you wait till the end, designers are like, ooh, can we go back and get a different domain? This is not going to be readable. Or, okay, I know you're really set on this emblem, but
interesting.
Actually, it looks like this.
Yeah.
And it looks exactly like your competitor. Have you thought about those things?
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, it's almost like the key to great design kind of starts near the beginning. You almost need to be involved with the business, especially if this business has no assets, to really be involved with the business early on to make sure that their assets are being, that they're, I guess, what they're creating for themselves isn't going to be applicable to quality assets down the road. Because it's harder to, fix something now that it's all, in that case.
Save time and money too, spend the money in a way that you're actually basing on research and focus groups and how people are interacting with the buying process and sort of that brand journey, and laying those foundations first, right? Because it's too late for me to be on the back end of a website, we want to
Yeah.
change the headline. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's too late
Yeah.
a little bit.
Interesting.
So yeah, I encourage that as soon as possible, like make that part of the conversation, right? Design isn't this end product all the time.
Yeah.
You want to think ahead,
Yeah.
kind of give you the best roadmap, I think, for
Yeah.
success. And everybody's on board with those early audits and surveys. Like the proof is there. You're seeing how these audiences respond.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Like, what to you is like a quality introduction to a client? Like, what would you like, hope to do when like a client comes to you for the first time? How do you want to approach that, like in an ideal world, usually?
I think the ideal client comes in knowing they have a problem, but they don't know how to solve it. And they're not necessarily sure what the problem is, but they know something's not working. So rather than, oh, let's, go spend a bunch on digital ads, or, oh, let's get you, in front of all these trade shows. It's like, is that really the right space for you?
Right.
Are people really going to engage with you in the way that you want? Maybe you just need a landing page on your website that drives engagement and makes people want to purchase, right? So I think there's different ways of like, sure, we can throw money around, but taking a step back and kind of looking around how are other people doing it.
Yeah.
As well.
It's almost like saying like design isn't just looking good, it's about strategy as well as anything else when it comes to your business.
Yeah, definitely.
That's
I mean, we will always want to make pretty things and striking images and messages that kind of make you stand still, but we want to like stand on a foundation that we've put in research to actually prove, hey, this will give you a return.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, knowing that in mind, like as a business, like what would you say your priority should be, like especially when it comes to design thinking?
I think it starts early on with naming and positioning, right? There's so many different avenues you can take. There's so many different industry trends. But I think that's like kind of step one. And I really encourage brands like shop it around, ask people. And a lot of times I show up into meetings and I'm like, I may not be your target audience. So don't always rely on, my gut reaction. Send out documentation. What does everybody think about it? Would you walk into this store if it was named this? Would you buy this product if it was named that?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of like pull in, and that's how I try to make conversations with clients feel accurate and substantial, right? It's not this subjective. Let's talk about blue for half an hour.
Yeah.
No, let's see in your market, how do people respond to blue?
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of those conversations where like, yes, it can be emotionally heated and excited, but let's like base it on real reactions, real engagement, real data.
Because that's what I'm always curious about. Because I think when it comes to tackling great design, I think the thing that everybody always comes back to is like, it just always seems so innocuous. It seems like so random at times. Like it just seems like, well, I don't know, this looks like what is McDonald's really good, or is it just because it's good because they've stuck around for so long, And so, but in a lot of ways, what you're suggesting is that it comes down to always kind of going out there asking about it and seeing how people react to it or whatever like that.
But like to your credit, like that's the best case scenario. When someone walks in a space and the design isn't overbearing, the story is compelling, right? But I'm not shoving it down your throat. If it fits in this sort of natural space and you want to engage with it and purchase, or you want to send your kid to this school because you had this sort of environment that welcomed the curriculum in that way, right? Then I'm doing my job.
Yeah.
If you walk in and you're like, oh, this is overproduced, then design is sort of in the forefront. And I think it should be part of the storyline to create the engagement.
Yeah, because like as a business, how do you know if like, because some businesses may not like, they may hadn't like know they have business problems, but they may not be able to identify like, oh, my design is the problem. Like how would you suggest businesses go about recognizing like, oh, right now my design, like how do I start to identify that my design is the culprit?
Yeah, I think there's easy ways to kind of think about the channels in which you market yourself, the platforms, right? And not everybody needs to do it the same. Maybe, your audience is on Instagram and you don't really need a print budget.
Yeah.
Maybe you actually need to think about signage because you get more foot traffic in a space, right? So there's a lot of different, I think, checklists, and they're based on the brand journey and the purchasing of how people engage and kind of take an action, right? We want to go beyond just looking at pretty things. We want the audience to engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
We want to create that impact. But I think a lot of times with clients, I'll encourage them to sort of like, let's look under the hood, pull out every material that you've put in front of somebody.
Yeah.
Like, let's catalog it. Let's see what's out there. And maybe the common theme is, hey, you're using too much stock photography.
Yeah.
Like, you've got this beautiful space. Let's photograph it.
Mm.
Or, I see you're using the same messaging in every material. Okay, let's like navigate it because different people are going to pick up different items and different people are going to engage in the website a different way.
Interesting. Yeah.
So just catalog it. Like, let's get everything together. And then at that point, we can kind of do a little bit of qualitative research, right?
Yeah.
We can see what's serving you and what's not.
Yeah. That sounds like, to me too, and I'm sure to like a lot of businesses in New Orleans, that research and design, like those two words seem almost like foreign to each other, in a lot of ways. But like, do you feel like there's that pushback at all? Like where people say like, oh, we should research this, or, or do you, you firmly believe like that's the way, right? Like to get the good design.
Yeah, I think, and then again, this is my opinion, right?
Yeah.
I'm a little biased, but I do think there are moments where people still see design thinking as kind of siloed.
Yeah.
A designer does this, a writer does this, a photographer does this.
Yeah, exactly.
But I really encourage like a team of brains to show up.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's not just like...
Yeah, and a lot of times that can influence budget. Like, we don't actually need to spend this. We can think about it this way. So I really encourage people to sort of think about it in a team mentality. And then if it's like this conversation of, maybe she doesn't know enough about our industry or she hasn't stepped foot in the store, I am always like, you're absolutely right. I don't live your job 24 hours a day. Right? I'm coming in with a expertise on campaign work. So in that moment, I'm like, let's pull in your key stakeholders. Pull somebody in from your board that knows your brand well. Pull in a prospective parent. Pull in all these different voices, right? And so I'm not the end all be all.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I will craft teams on my end that sort of can build that foundation of what you need from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people are thinking about it that way. And it's like, talking about it from that same avenue, like having all these voices, like, especially for smaller businesses, that might sound like, oh my gosh, like I don't even have that person, or like, so how accessible do you feel like good design really can be,
I think too, there are moments where people are like, oh, I don't have time to ask so-and-so.
Yeah.
It's going to be a burden on them. And I think in New Orleans, like, people want to help. People want to support small to medium-sized businesses.
Yeah.
And people show up. There's so many times where I've reached out to a colleague and said, hey, like, I really just want your perspective. It'll take you 30 seconds. And people show up and do it. Because I think there's this interest to invest in each other in our work. And I really encourage small business to medium businesses to think about that. Like, if your budget is not for a big, large advertising agency, like, let's use the resources around you, the audience around you, to pull in that data. And then maybe you will get to that point where you actually can do a 10-year mark where you spend 6 to 7 months really doing audits well.
Yeah.
But I think we're in a community where we're happy to see each other succeed.
Yeah.
So I think lean on those resources.
Yeah. Well, and it's like from there, a big question mark is obviously at the execution of that, right?
Sure.
And so how accessible, some people are still, a lot of people are like, these days doing a lot of stuff on like, I know you're a designer, but the big word Canva out there, it's like, do you feel like, should people be, because like, I don't think a lot of people know that they could just invest in like design thinking rather than just the execution part of it. Like that's all everyone's thinking about. Or at least it seems like from my anecdotal experience, but you may have another perspective, but like where within the realms of accessibility, like where do you think like the dollars should be spent first, and really people's investment in their time when it comes to, the design for their business?
Right. I'll always make recommendations.
Yeah.
I never
want to... We love a good recommendation.
I never want to tell a business like, hey, get ready to spend this if you really want that.
Yeah.
I encourage more to like plan for it. Like if you need to get by on Canva and you need to work with a template and you need to pull in stock photography and that's the time and the place for it, to get you out the door, right? To get you set up, I say don't spend tons on that. Save for when you do have those moments where you can actually invest in materials that are going to like last you forever. And I think sometimes people don't always think about that. Like, oh, it's going to, it's going to take this to create this shoot and this to hire this person. But I like to empower clients to say, like, this is custom and we're going to get it right. And we're going to base it on the research that you need. Sure, we can tweak year by year and we can sort of pull in refreshes. But I think for a brand to like really have that foundation it needs, like, let's spend the money on custom craft assets for you. Yeah.
Because I guess too, because you're almost saying as well, pulling in from the beginning part is it's kind of like going to cost you more in the long run if you're taking such a long, like wrong route first too long that then you have to come back and fix it all with someone else, that has the expertise that you need.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you had good tips, like I wonder, like what tips would you give to businesses that are starting their journey but don't quite know if like a designer's right for them yet? How do they prepare themselves to not make too many wrong decisions before that happens?
I would say like try to form an awareness of your limitations. And I try to do that for myself as a homeowner. Like, okay, there's a certain line of like how much I can fix in this home, right? I don't want to do the electrical.
Yeah.
Like I want to hire a specialist. I don't want to make sure my lights come on.
Right.
I don't want to do the plumbing because so I think there's that level of trust too that you are hiring an expert, right? And they've spent hopefully their career, their passion, their enthusiasm for what they do to get it right. And a huge part, I think, of storytelling, it's like, I want you happy. Like, I want you to back your brand because I'm not going to be there when you're opening the front door and welcoming customers in, right? So I'm giving you the storytelling and the assets and the implementation, the tools to sort of push it out there. But I want you to be proud of it because it's your story. Like, you've got to tell it. But I want to make sure that story you're telling, the guy down the street's not saying the same one.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And I think that's where spending the money is like, you need to differentiate yourself. And you kind of can't get that when you're using templates. Everybody else has access to them.
Yeah.
Everybody's using stock photography, right? So I think it's like investing in yourself as early as you can and really working with somebody one-on-one or within an agency or studio to really pull in as much feedback, as much research as you can, and then testing. I think if you do it by yourself, right, that's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
And I don't envy anybody who's kind of trying to figure that out on their own. I think that's a steep hill to climb.
Yeah.
But, I think startups, entrepreneurs are scrappy. They need to get it done. And so I never want to say, you should have spent this earlier, right? We've all got to go along our brand journey in our own way. But that's sort of my recommendation, right?
No, definitely.
Let's think as much as we can ahead of time. Yeah.
Well, and then my last thing is I'm curious about businesses that have had design or kind of a current design. What tips would you give to them if they, I guess what I would say is if these businesses don't know if their design is kind of maybe outdated or maybe it's time for an update, what are some of the telltale signs for a business to know, like, hey, I need to change my branding, like, or I need to change my design? Like, what are some of those telltale signs that it's like it's time to come and call Mary Louise and get her input on this? Like, what are those signs?
The big one, right? Technology, it breaks.
Yeah.
It breaks. You can't fix it. What do I do? Nobody's coming to the site anymore. Nobody's signing up for this, right?
Yeah. Business goals aren't working. Yeah.
And sort of it stops.
Yeah.
And you see, there's always technology to keep up with. There's always updates. And I think it's kind of like just staying nimble with the times, right? Throughout COVID, people weren't showing up in your store. I hope your web experience was solid enough to still engage, right? So I think there's ways of just kind of staying flexible with the time and having awareness for your audience. I think you can get a little tunnel vision about, we're excited about this new program. We're excited about the funding that's coming in, right? But is anybody going to attend those events? Have you promoted them enough? So I think it's just kind of like having an awareness for that. And it's open-mindedness. It's even like tapping yourself on the shoulder and saying, I need to pivot.
Yeah.
I may not want to, but I need to pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone's out there ready to pivot.
Tough love. Tough love.
You know where it can come from. And if they do want to pivot and they want to reach out to you, where would they find you and Quirkus?
Quirkus, yes.
On social and on the web.
Yeah, definitely. Quirkus.design. It's Latin for oak tree.
Oh,
grew up with a giant oak tree that my grandmother
That's cool.
filled with concrete back in the day. Not the way to do it now.
Okay.
To save it. And it grew to kind of the size of a sequoia. Enormous.
Wow.
So it was my first,
That was here?
tree house back in New Iberia.
New Iberia.
From
Did you go to
Cajun
the Gumbo
country.
Fest?
I do.
Oh,
Multiple years.
Oh,
yeah.
I've been to that Gumbo Fest. Yeah.
It was a good one.
Yeah, it's good. They had some Japanese people in there at one point.
Really?
There's a Japanese team the one day we went. Yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah.
I have to
jot
that down.
Yeah, jot that down. Shout outs to New Iberia. As well, where else can they find you on, I'm assuming all social platforms?
All social. And I used to sort of be behind the curtain in agency world. And now I'm solo. So I pushed my way into networking. It did naturally come for me. But it's been great. And I think the New Orleans community has really been kind of open-minded entrepreneurials and singular creative brains. So come say hi at networking.
Yeah. If you want to network, find Mary Louise.
I'll be there.
Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah.
And we'll see everybody else on the next one. Thanks for tuning into the show. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This episode of Make Marketing Make Sense is brought to you by Comfystone. If your business needs organic social media video content, video ads, or video podcasting, hit up Comfystone at comfystone.com and follow Comfystone on Instagram and TikTok. Until next time, this is Make Marketing Make Sense.